Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod, and I'm so thrilled. It's Wednesday, and it is the 10 o'clock hour, so we have Evelyn Gould with us here in the studio. She is a BCBA, and she has extensive experience working with autism, and all of that's wonderful, and you're such a great resource for that reason. But what I always say that I love about you, Evelyn, is that, and I love so many things about you, don't think it's only that I love about you, but I love the fact that you get that parents have this other stuff going on, and you allow for that. When you're talking about how to intervene with a behavior or something, you allow for the fact that we're having a life and emotions, and that we're ready to have a meltdown, and that we've reached critical mass. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when over the years, I've heard people speak, and they line out these beautiful interventions for something, and you go, yeah, that is just brilliant and wonderful, but where in the heck does that fit in laundry? Yeah. And I got to go to the grocery store, and the realities of life, I feel, sometimes get left out.
Just can't deal with one more thing to kind of deal with all this other stuff.
Yes. Or that I might be able to deal with that next Wednesday, but today, oh no, today that can't happen. And I really feel like you get that, and you talk about that, and allow us the room to have our feelings, that we're gonna have feelings, that you start from that point, which is so wonderful for me, and I know for other people too, because they've written it and said that. So thank you for constantly being the person who thinks about what it's like for us on our side of it. That's such a huge thing. That's a huge gift that you have. And I know we've asked you to come in today to talk about early intensive behavior intervention and what it does for the family, what kinds of things come up in a very realistic way. Not in the, oh, airy-fairy, isn't it fabulous? Because I know a lot of you are out there and you're watching and thinking, okay, I want early intensive behavior intervention, and I want it for you too, and Evelyn wants it for you too, and but it's not like it comes with a little magic wand and everything gets easier. In fact, it's a hard road. For a lot of us, it's really intensive and emotional.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine how intrusive and challenging it would be to have that on top of all your other stresses that you're trying to deal with having a kid with autism. But the interesting thing is that we talked about, Shannon, is that really no one, it's only a recent thing that people are actually asking questions about, well, what is it actually like for these families that have early intensive behavioural intervention? The focus is very much always just on the child and helping the child, and no one's really paid that much attention. It seems like no one's really paying that much attention to the parents' experience or what's going on with the parents and how can we help them cope with having a child with autism. It's all very like, help the child, even parent training, you know, I mean, I'm saying that I've done it myself, like where you're doing parent training and it's really focusing on helping the child have a better experience of life, or have a better experience of the family, or better interactions with the parents, rather than trying to help parents cope with what they're going through.
Yeah.
So, and in the research is the same, like there's only recently been some studies or people doing preliminary kind of surveys and stuff to figure out, well, what actually is it like for parents, and yes, we're seeing great outcomes for the child, but is that actually having an effect to help parents' levels of stress go down? What are they going through? And how can we better help the whole family, not just this child?
Yeah, and I think there is more awareness now, and you hear more people talking about it, and I'm thrilled that the conversation has started, because I remember we were so fixated on getting started on ABA, and then we did. And I think with a lot of things in life, when you are waiting in anticipation for something and then you get started, there's that sort of honeymoon phase, and then you get in the middle of it and realize, oh, okay, this is fabulous, but this is going to be a long haul, and I had no idea that my life was going to be affected in this way. And then both my husband and I went, ooh, I think we need some help with this. Like, who do we talk to? Where do we go? Is there a parent support group? And at that time, there wasn't. Now I see them springing up all over the place, and I really appreciate that. But if for families, let's start at the beginning. For families, what kinds of things should they know starting EIBI?
Well, Shannon, I think that you do a great job on your show with talking about things that you should think about and providing support for things you think about, because one of the major things that seems to come up for parents who embark on EIBI programs is this therapist stress, or stress related to having a team of therapists. Now here at CARD, if you live within a certain catchment area, the way they work is they give you the therapists, or they assign the therapists to your team, I believe. And so you don't have to go and recruit therapists, but that's not the case for a great deal of parents who are trying to set up ABA programs, particularly outside of America, in the UK and so on, that therapists are responsible for, parents are responsible for hiring their own therapists and putting together their own therapist team. So that in itself becomes a really stressful experience if you don't know what you're supposed to look for, how do you even go about it, and then how do you know if someone's going to be good or not, and then when you do get a team together, you have to struggle with like paying them, scheduling them, what do you do if they don't turn up, you know, what if you have high staff turnover and so on like that, and that actually is a really big stress for parents, managing the team and then having these people coming constantly in and out of your house as well. Yeah. That's a big stress.
I did not have to put my team together. I was so lucky, so fortunate that I did not have to do that, because that would, I'm sure, you know, I don't know that I could have handled that. I really don't, quite honestly. But I know lots of people who have done that, and it's stressful. And they say, this is really, really stressful. I gotta remind everybody, we talk about how stressful this is, but it's worth it. It's all worth it. Yeah. But if you could have some skills to get through it, or some things to think of to make it easier so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, then maybe it could be less stressful, right?
Absolutely. And I guess that's what we're getting at today, just talking about like what can you do that's practical that can help decrease the stress, and what are EIBI providers and so on, what should they be doing to actually help support families? And they could do this better. And so things like perhaps having a therapist liaison person, or some person who's like has information for parents about how to recruit. Like you have a show that you do sometimes on, I've seen on Skills Live, where you give advice to parents about recruiting and how to go about it, and what types of things you should think about, and what types of people, and
how to interview them.
How to interview them, and that's really, really helpful, I think.
Yeah. And how to check to make sure that they're not registered sex offenders, and we talk about all those things. And if you have questions about that, you know, let us know. But we'll do it later on in the week to make sure that everybody knows. But it's time intensive, and we got that information from, you know, parents over the years going through the process and saying, well, here's what I learned that you do, and here's what I learned that you don't do, because nobody should reinvent that wheel.
Absolutely. And then even if you do have the advantage of having a company like, say, CARD, who provides you with therapists, that still doesn't get rid of the stress associated with maybe like you don't gel well with a therapist, or you're concerned, or you're still putting a lot of trust into someone else who's coming into your home and working with your child. Yeah. You still might have to deal with unreliability issues, or just therapists who are not so communicative with you, or don't interact with you well, and so on. And so you still have to, there's still a lot of stress associated with it, I think.
Yeah, somebody had said to me at some point, that, because I was feeling bad that I just wasn't gelling with a therapist, and somebody said, you know, over the period of time that your child's going to get therapy, you're probably going to have between like 30 and 80 therapists come into your home for a period of time and work with your child. It would be unreasonable to think that you're going to get along beautifully with all of them, that you're going to gel and have, you know, this wonderful hearts, flowers, and roses relationship with every single one of them. And I went, oh, okay. So I can let go of the expectation that I have to adore every single person who walks through the door, and that we're the best of friends and exchange gifts and cards. You know what I mean? Some people became family members that will be family members forever. Yeah. And other people were just people who worked in my home, and, you know, that's just how it worked out.
Yeah, I can imagine it must be very difficult, because these people are coming into your home like every week, maybe a few times a week, and they're coming into your personal space. And especially if you have a program going that's like a net or natural environment style program, or you're working on generalization or something, and you potentially have these people going into your bedrooms and your bathrooms, and, you know, into every nook and cranny of your personal space. And so it's hard to wrap your head around allowing someone that you don't gel very well with, or I don't know, just don't click with doing that. I know I would have a hard time with that, and so I guess I guess it is helpful to just think about it as they're coming into, they're working in my home as if they're coming to clean it or something. Like,
right.
They're not, but I mean, they're not though. They're working with your child, so
right.
I don't know. It's really hard, I imagine, to kind of get in that headspace.
It is, and there are at different times, different things that would. But you know what helped us was that we came up with a set. Sort of hierarchy of our rules that whenever a new therapist came through the door, we would go, okay, here's the deal in our house.
Yeah.
You know, I know you're going to be functioning on a whole bunch of rules that you have, but here are the rules in our house. Here's how we function. Here's how we would like for it to work. And that helped everybody.
I think that's really important because the fact is these people are working for you. And so, you know, I wouldn't expect to go into any kind of job and not be given like the handbook for working at the place that I'm working at.
Yeah.
This is what's expected of you. This is what we expect in terms of professionalism and dress and that kind of thing. And then also being working with children, I obviously have codes of conduct that I have to subscribe to and ethical guidelines and so on. So there's, of course, you should think about it that way. And so the therapist should expect to get that from you too. And it is really helpful to put those boundaries in place right at the start before any emotions get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, I mean, the first thing that I would say to everybody is I have baby monitors, some that you will see and some that you won't. So I will hear and say everything. I will hear and see everything that you do with and for my child. So don't say or do anything that you wouldn't want me to say and hear.
Absolutely.
So that was my first number one. And I would say next most important thing, don't ever tell my child they're wrong when they're not. You know, if you're working on a lesson and he skips ahead to something else, don't tell him he's wrong because that's the lesson. Because that's a pet peeve of mine. And I would say that's the thing that I will get maddest about quickest, so don't do that and we'll be all good. Don't ever be afraid to ask questions because we have devoted all of our time and energy to making sure that our child has this therapy, so please ask questions. Don't assume that I think that you know everything because I'm sure you don't. So ask where things are, ask questions. We'll be happy to answer questions and we'll support you in all that you do as long as you ask questions. And my other big thing that wasn't the first 2 years, but after 2 years, he had progressed to a point where I said, I prefer it when we go on an outing that you allow me to talk to him and you talk to me. Because different parents, different things, but I said, you know, talk to me about what you want me to say to him, but I know that someday you're not going to come anymore and I have to be able to make this work when you're not here, so I want you to talk to me, not him, when we're outside the house. And they would go, I can do that.
Yeah,
I can absolutely
should be doing that because you're absolutely right. And at that point, when you're doing stuff like community outings, it needs to be very much the people that are actually going to be in the child's life that are doing the intervention, and that you're just there to support them, and you should be feeding yourself out.
It's hard to do though.
But it is hard to do. It is hard to do.
It's hard. I mean, I see that when I go to school with my son and the teacher's asking him to do something, and I go, you know, make sure you do, and the teacher's like, please let me handle it. And I'm like, I know,
I do the same thing. It's very hard whenever I'm out with a family and I'm just like, I just want to fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need to guide, and maybe that requires feedback afterwards if you can't do it at the time.
Right.
But yeah, completely like laying out your boundaries is really important, and I would be very suspicious of anybody who wants to exclude you from your child's therapy. You know, there shouldn't be, it should be, a therapist should be able to be comfortable with you seeing whatever they do, and if they're not, then there's a problem.
Yeah, it's not okay.
For whatever reason, there's a problem. You're working with, you know, I think you're working with the most precious thing in the whole world, and that's somebody's child. And I wouldn't, you know, my most precious thing in the world, I wouldn't want someone be like okay with giving somebody it and then them just like disappearing. That's not okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. But and actually, now that I think about it, and I hadn't thought about this, once we started giving that sort of speech when people would come through the door, my stress level went down. Whenever, and on a regular basis, our therapists would change because a lot of times it's college students and they leave and they travel abroad or they graduate or they move on for whatever reason. But also there is rationale behind switching the team up from time to time so that your child doesn't get used to one person or one thing, that they're getting the best opportunity to generalize. But every time the schedule would change, my anxiety and stress would go through the roof. I'd be like, oh no, a whole new new set of people for me to get used to. It's not just my child. But it did get easier once I started going through that criteria. But what was really stressful for us always was not having any privacy.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing. Yeah.
It's very intrusive.
We were talking about that with Vince Redmond. He was on the show last week, and I was saying, imagine, because I'm sure that the therapists who came into our house can tell the most amazing tales because they heard conversations that my husband and I would continue to have a life. We continued to work. We continued to, things happened. They were treated to everything that we went through. The poor therapist that was there in my home the first time that the school filed due process against us, and that we got served the papers at the door, and I was hysterical and crying and going, "What's happening?" And there was a therapist there. At each little thing that happened, the therapists were there, and we had to allow for that. We just had to allow.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I live by myself now, which is very nice because I can just afford to do that. But I know how frustrating it is to when you're living with just friends or something and you have no privacy and you're just like, I just want the house to myself just for 1 hour. Yeah. So I can't even imagine how what that must feel like to have people just traipsing through all the time, all day, every day.
Except that, there is that thing that why they're coming. You know why they're coming, and you're seeing regular progress. And you wouldn't trade it for anything. I think that all parents have those days where they go, I wish they would all just go away. Yeah. But we don't really feel that. I always tell the story of being with my mother was one of the only family members that really would come and stay and would see what our regular life was like. If somebody else came, we would kind of, work the schedule so that they were there when we weren't having as much therapy. But my mother would come and stay and see, and she would go, okay, this is amazing. What's going on in your house? But I remember being with her at a store and saying, we got to go. And she, why? And I said, because we got to get home for therapy. We have therapy. We got to meet the therapist at the door in 10 minutes. We got to go right now. And she was going, this is just terrible. You can't ever get anything done. And I said, this is our life, it's our priorities here. And we got a phone call in that moment telling us that the therapist had been delayed for an emergency and was not going to be able to come. And of course, I was feeling a little bit bummed because we were, weren't going to have a therapy session that afternoon. It was going to be made up. But I turned and I said, well, I guess we can stay at the store. And my mother, who's 70 some odd years old, jumped up and down for joy in the store and said, we get to shop. And I looked at her and I went, really? And she said, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what your life is like on a regular basis. You're used to it now, but this is hard what you're doing. And I went, yeah, go figure. But I don't think enough people realize what it's like for families and the amount of time. 5 years for us. It's actually weirder for us now that isn't happening because we're so used to it. Even it's almost a year later that we still go, we have some time. What are we going to do? We don't have to schedule around therapy. We don't have to be someplace to meet somebody. So what are we going to do with that time? It's very bizarre.
Yeah, and then a lot of families, I don't know what it's like here so much, but making materials and like having to prepare things and have this toy ready and that ready and things are supposed to be organized and all that kind of thing, that also takes up a lot of time.
You know what, that's a really good thing to talk about. Let's take a break. Okay. We'll take a break and come back and talk about having your space ready, having the stuff ready, and continuing having things ready. Stick with us. We're going to be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod, and our special guest right now is the wonderful Evelyn Gould. She's a BCBA with extensive experience dealing with autism, and in particular, a lot of challenging behaviors that you've dealt with across your career. And we're talking with her today about what it's like, the parent's role in early intensive behavioral intervention and how stressful it is. That so often people talk about how, what it's going to be like for the child. I think we've had more talk about that in the last 7 years. But that we're just now getting to talk about what is it like for the family, for the parents, the stress level, the reality of it. Yeah, for the sibling, for the whole family, right down to the dog, because it changes the way the dog gets, the circumstances for the dog, right? Your day is different. And one of the things that you and I were talking about yesterday, which led us to this whole topic, I think a lot of people assume that, once a family starts ABA and they start to see progress with the child, that the stress level will decrease for the parents. But that isn't always the case, right?
No, I think we can't make that assumption. Definitely not. Just because the child makes a lot of progress doesn't necessarily mean that parents stop stressing about their child.
Yeah.
It's just not the way it works. I think there's always problems that are going to be happening and other stressors that are occurring with having a child with autism, and just life stressors as well that on top of having a child with autism.
And I do think that, financially, the things that happen once you start early intensive behavior intervention increase the stress, and I would argue that there are it's sometimes more stressful, because once you see that your child can make progress with ABA, then you become that much more convinced that this is something that your child has to have and has to have a certain amount. And it's, for most people, that's a little bit of a battle. At best, it's a negotiation. Yeah,
and I think as human beings, we got to remember that we always fixate a lot on the past and the future.
Yes.
And so it's not just about, oh great, my child's doing quite well right now and everything's kind of falling into place. Everyone's always going to be worrying about, especially like what you're saying, say for example with the progress, a lot of parents that I've worked with have then just tortured themselves about like, what if I'd started this earlier?
Yes.
Where would my child be? What if I did more hours before? Or what if I'd done this and that? And what if I don't do this? And then they're also worrying about the future. No matter what, you're always going to worry about your child's future. So just because your child is making a lot of progress doesn't stop you worrying about those things, or thinking about the past and what did I do and could I have done something different and so on.
Yeah, you would think, if you're just looking at it on paper, if somebody was saying, well, gosh, what I really, usually, at some point there'll be a conversation with somebody about what you want to target first. And say, for instance, the parent says, well, how much better would our lives be if we just had toilet training under control? And that seems insurmountable when the parent says that, right? And then the ABA team comes in and miraculously, very quickly, there's work involved. I don't mean to make it sound like they wave the magic wand at all, but toilet training gets under control and the parent goes, phew, for a millisecond and goes, all right, well, now we need to work on this. There's very little like, woohoo, we're done right now. We're done. I don't know anybody who ever gets there.
No, because even if you have a child, like I have a typical child, and if they have some kind of problems, I don't think you're ever going to stop worrying about them. I know my mum still, and it drives me insane, but I had a lot of problems when I was late teens, and I'm fine now, and I have been for a long time, but I know my mum still says things to me which imply to me that she's really concerned about me the minute I look tired or the minute I seem stressed. So it just doesn't go away just because your child's doing well at all.
I used to make fun of my mom. I didn't have difficulties, and my mother, there are times that she talks to me now and I say to her, how old am I? How old am I in your head? There's a commercial like that right now. And I used to make fun of her and go, what is with you? What? And she would say, well, you're always going to be my child. I kind of get it in a totally different way now, that I think that there's something hormonal that happens, that they hand you a baby, whether you birthed it or not, they hand you the baby and something keys in and you go, all right, I'm going to be protective for the rest of my existence of this being, and my chief job will be worrying.
Yeah, and also, like you said, there's other things that are associated with this kind of a treatment that carry on, like the financial burden, and that financial burden is a massive stressor for families.
Yes.
I'm thinking about in the UK, there's just no funding for it, or it's very, very difficult and rare to get funding for an ABA program. So most families that I worked with have had to remortgage their houses and take out loans and all sorts of things, and that burden is with them for a really long time, if not forever, afterwards. And so that stress doesn't go away.
Yes. Yeah.
I have never worked with a family who's regretted it or said that that it wasn't worth it, but it doesn't mean that it's not a major stressor.
Right, it is, and it's an ongoing thing. I've said before on the show, I don't know that. I still cannot see a year later, and we had the benefit of so much that was provided for us by the state, but still we had to become a one-income family and all the devastation that created. I don't know that I'll ever see a day where financially we're completely without ramifications of everything that happened. I don't know. I'd like to imagine that that day exists, but I wouldn't trade any of it.
And I don't know if it can be for any families, because even with insurance mandates and so on, you're still having to fork out, even if you have the benefit of being insured and your insurance company funding your program, you still have co-pays and all sorts of other stuff that you have to pay for. And like you said, you know, if families are required, or if a parent's required to be there, then maybe that means a parent giving up a job and like all sorts of things. So the financial burden is just unavoidable. I mean, the extent of it could vary, but it's unavoidable, really.
Holly Robinson Peete did a blog about a year ago, the 8 things that she wished that everybody in the world would know about autism, and number 1 is that no one can afford it. And I always think, well, if Holly Robinson Peete can't afford it, then absolutely no one can afford it. So there you have it. So I think that is one of the great common threads, and it's different for everybody, just like our kids are different, but financially it is very stressful, very, very stressful. So we were talking before the break about the fact that getting things prepared and having stimuli and having the toy available and having the room set up and all these things, that's part of the stress too. That even when you've, whether the team is showing up and you didn't have to hire them or you had to hire the team, there are things that as a caregiver you're responsible for that only you can deliver. I think that there are some people, I even have a good friend who at one point said to me, oh, you're so lucky that your son has autism because you get all that free daycare.
Wow.
And you know, amazing. Bless her heart, I know what she meant, because she thought that it was this thing where, you know, ding dong, somebody comes to the door and I let them in and go, hey, I'm going to go get my hair and nails done. And I'll come back and pick him up in 3 hours. No concept whatsoever. And I realized I was not doing a good job of letting people know what my life was like when she said that. And there was no malice intended, but yes, I wanted to go, seriously, you need to rethink that statement. Because there's a lot of stuff that you need to be responsible for and have ready, and stimuli and things that you were talking about, regardless of whether, but even more if you're directing the team.
Yeah, if you're running a team yourself, exactly. And if you don't, if you're running the team yourself, sometimes you can get a good therapist who will be able to do those things for you, and you can delegate delegate things to maybe your lead therapist or whatever. But that most of the time, I mean, those therapists are going to want to be paid for that time.
Yes.
So a lot of the times parents do try and do it all themselves, and it's very, very time consuming. Like you totally underestimate how time consuming this stuff is. I used to have to do stuff, I would make stuff myself as a supervisor just to get it done, because sometimes you could be waiting a while for stuff to get made and then you can't begin teaching the child, and that would frustrate me. So I would spend time making stuff, and it's so time consuming.
It is. I have to say that, you know, now with the advent of the technology, and we had a gentleman on the show the other day that has this great app that's $2, and it helps you to be able to make flashcards with your own pictures really easily. And I went, oh, where were you when I was doing this stuff at 3 o'clock in the morning, and
cutting,
you know, trimming a picture and laminating it and doing all this stuff,
and then being told your picture's not good enough and having to do it again.
Then you got it from I remember having to take pictures of before, during, and after events that Jem was doing, like, you know, so I had to think through, okay, what kind of picture do I want it, because it needed to be him actually. So it was like putting on your socks and shoes. So I had to go get a picture of the blank feet, and then get a picture of one sock on, one sock off, and, you know, photo shoots that we would have. But he learned, you know, first you do this, and then you do this, and last you do this, from the sequence of events. And I was so thrilled when he got to kindergarten and he was having to do first, then, and last, because he had gotten it because it was reinforcing to him, because it was his own feet.
That's the thing.
It was worth it.
You can buy a lot of materials, but first of all, they're very expensive.
Yeah.
And second of all, like you're saying, they're not tailored to your child in particular, and they may work, they may be effective, but you may find that if you're tailoring them to your own child and your own house and your own environment, that it's going to be more effective.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just has to be, to teach whatever it is, it has to be your own child's stuff.
Yeah, but you know, this new app, you can, and it also they can put together sentences, so it can double for those kinds of things, and you can put text on it. And so if all you have to do is take the picture and then type in whatever word you want, and then it's stored in the app. So if you have the ability to do that, and it's a $2 app, AirTalk, that you can get, and you can buy it in the iTunes store. But you know, for those of us who are still living in the Ice Age and we're cutting out flashcards and stuff, it's time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was good that in the place that I used to work in is that some of the families that I work with whose children did really well and then they graduated from their program, the parents would donate all the materials to the centre so that we could then give them out to other families to save them the work. So that kind of lending library really can be helpful if you have some families who are also in the same area doing programs. Maybe you can do some sharing of resources or sharing of time, making resources, or get together over a bottle of wine and make stuff. I don't know, try and make it a bit more reinforcing for yourselves.
Because there are some flashcards that you could share with. You know, if it's something from the community. I remember we had to go around and take pictures of all the different stores that we went into, and to have those. There are lending libraries too that they online now, that there are some people who will share their pictures online for that kind of thing as well. That's a really good idea.
I mean, but again, I have to say that it can be time consuming even trying to find those things.
Yes.
So if you know somebody who maybe could do the research already or has done it already, even can point you in the right direction, that could be really helpful.
Yeah. Another reason why, you know, having that local support group and the more global support group, so that you can lean on somebody. I was saying this the other day, that when we were at the Autism Walk for Los Angeles and talking to different parents and hearing, you know, it was very interesting how the stories would go. There would be people who had very little kids and they were saying, we just started ABA and this is our first time at the walk. And then when we would talk to the different advocates and the different organizations, they were always parents of kids, almost always, who were 8 and older. And Nancy and I were talking about it afterwards and saying, isn't that interesting, because you get, in the beginning, you don't have time to do anything else but survive. But you get to a point where you can turn around and help other people. So if you're one of those people in the beginning, you know, ask one of us who's been around for a while and say, you know, where did you get this flashcard? Don't spend the time doing all the research. Ask in your local support group, or ask us, okay, where do I find this, so that you don't waste a bunch of your valuable time stressing about where do I get it. Because there might be somebody who is in your community support group who's got it all already there for you.
And not just pictures, but things like, I remember going around houses and trying to find matching identical items and stuff like that, and you're like frantically looking through drawers, because you just, things, really obvious things that you think you have lying around and you just don't. So like if you have someone else who can give you 2 blue blocks and 2 spoons and 2 this and 2 that, that can be really helpful.
Absolutely, because there's so many lessons. You know what, one of the greatest things somebody gave us was, it was a Fisher-Price Noah's Ark. So there were 2 of every animal on the Ark. So when we used those for so many lessons, it was absolutely amazing how many different things we used that Noah's Ark for. The boat went away, but the little animals that went with it were really, really helpful.
Toy libraries are so valuable because toys are so expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can get a lot of stuff used, or gently used stuff. Fascinating stuff. We should take a little break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more about some of the different stressors that happen and how we can help ourselves to deal with it. Stick with us. Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod, and my special guest right now is Evelyn Gould. She's a BCBA, a board-certified behavior analyst. We've been talking about the parents' role in early intervention, early intensive behavioral intervention, and how stressful it is, and how it really, I always say it's like picking your house up, shaking it really hard, and then setting it back down a little on its side. That's what it's like, but it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. But I think it's important to talk about the different stressors, and you know, there's a big elephant in the room that we got to talk about, which is the emotional side of expectations. And I think that's one of the hardest things, is that, you know, you say, okay, I've seen the statistics. I really want, I want to see progress. So why wouldn't I do ABA? There's a lot of things that a family has to sacrifice and move around to do them, but you sign up for it and you do it, and you see your child starting to make progress, but you never let go of wanting to know what your outcome is going to be, right? And what it means.
What that progress means. Yeah, for sure. I was just saying to Shannon that one of the things that always comes up with parents is they want to know, you know, will my child be doing this? Will my child talk? Will my child do this? Will my child go to school, do this, do this? Where is my child? How's he doing? And that kind of thing. And it's really hard because the answer is that we can't predict the future. We're doing our very best, and the best you can say is, well, you know, your child is making progress and doing really well with where they're at. I can't tell you where we're going to be, because it would be very unfair to make those assumptions.
Which is maddening. Which is absolutely maddening. And, you know, although on the other side, it's not rational. I mean, I was saying to Evelyn that I would stand there and say to our supervisor, Sabrina Tuma, I would say, so how's he doing? How's he doing? And she would say, he's doing great. But what I was really asking in my heart of hearts was, how far behind is he? Is he going to be able to get married? Is he going to have a job? Is he going to go to college? Is he going to be happy? And I really wanted her to answer those questions, although I knew enough, although sometimes we do, right? As parents, we'll go, you know, the big fear will come out and say, you know, is my child going to be able to be on the high school baseball team? Or, you know, is my child going to be able to take the SAT? Whatever it is for the individual family that you're, you know, the big thing. And, you know, sometimes you will ask it, and then as soon as you ask it, you realize, oh my gosh, that's completely ridiculous. How could you possibly know that? But we do want to know, like, are we on a path to something, right? And even that is hard to answer.
But I mean, we can say, yes, I don't know, but we're on the path, and we're doing the best we can, and we're going to get him as far along that path as we can get him. But you can't predict. You don't know where you're going to end up, and you don't know how many, you know, there's so many variables involved. It's just unfair to make an assumption about where your child's going to end up. Or for us anyway, it's not right to make an assumptions about that.
And I was sharing with Evelyn that one of the things that I would ask frequently is, how far behind are we? The first time that he got assessed by the school, the school was cutthroat about, well, you know, he's on this skill, he has the skills of an 8-month-old when he was 3. And it was over and over and over again. But, you know, I got through it. And then I would constantly bug Sabrina, and she'd say, he's catching up. And I always wanted to see it depicted in a graph, right? We have all these other graphs to show behavior and progress, but I wanted to see how far behind we are. And we have that now on skills, that I, you know, can look and see, okay, this is where we are in relation to where we would like to be. And it's with little, you know, colors and everything. I'm very happy about that.
I think that's so important, like being able to visually see where your child is and where they've come from, because part of the thing is that you're, like we were talking about earlier, about how you never stop worrying. And so you can lose sight of where you've come from. And, you know, we don't want to go back there, but I mean it in terms of, look, you were here, and look, now your kid's here. How great is that? And we're still working up to here. You know, we're still moving forward. And so on a graph, you can see, like, wow, I was here, and he does have all these things. We're making progress.
And it is amazing to look back. I think it's hard for parents because we don't want to look at that stuff. But I know even now for my son, if I don't see somebody for 6 months or 8 months or even a year, and then we get together and they go, oh my gosh, he's, you know, he's doing so well, and he's improved so much, and I go, oh, that's funny, you know, because I'm with him every day, so I don't notice the things that they notice after not seeing him for months on end. And I think it's really good to look back from time to time and go, right, yes, progress.
It's more happening. Like it's less about looking back and taking stock of actually being where you are and being like, oh look, this is where we are, rather than jumping ahead and just worrying about what's next. Just trying to ground yourself and look, this is where we are. We've come so far.
I'm very good at either living in the past or living in the future. And the thing that somebody reminded me of a couple of years ago is that, yes, that's all great and we all do that, but true joy only happens in the moment. And I went, oh.
Well, living only happens in the moment.
Yeah. So, but it would all, you know, I think we all want to experience more joy, and that when we spend time in the past, we spend time in the future, we're never going to find it there.
And you can't take any kind of action if you're in the future or the past. Right now is the only time you have control over doing something.
which can be overwhelming sometimes, absolutely overwhelming. I think there's a never-ending list too. You can go up to almost any autism parent and go, what's your list? What's next on your list? You know, what thing are you about to start working on? So there's that constant feeling of checking one thing off, but that the list grows. Treadmill, which can be stressful too. So stay in the moment is our mantra for today.